I think we're poised at a very interesting point in time because technology is enabling lots of things that previously were not possible, cost points which were also previously not feasible.
Why is there a feeling that it's really hard to sell to the NHS from your perspective?
The people who run these organizations are trying very hard to do the right thing, but the instruction booklet for how to do this does not include any kind of bias towards encouraging small and medium-sized enterprises and the innovation around them. Turning these ideas into sustainable revenues and business models is hard work. Government ministers standing up and saying, we believe in growth, we believe in innovation, as if one will naturally lead to the other. The big guys are not doing enough. If you're going to encourage smaller companies to play, you've got to find ways of creating a more level playing field. If you were a consumer, if you were buying running shoes, and if the shoe was causing sores on the inside of your foot, you'd stop buying those shoes. Right? There isn't an equivalent mechanism here in terms of being able to hold suppliers to account. I actually think we need to run some experiments for how to do this kind of innovation, rather than try and design some grand scheme which will work everywhere. Maybe it won't. We have a lesson there. Exactly what happened with the COVID-19 vaccine. That was an experiment which came good. We were sitting there one day, my colleagues and I, and we thought, what have we actually learned through all these years of screwing up in everything we do? We collected data from over 3,000 companies around the world because we were trying to understand not just what was going on in the UK or in North America or Europe, but globally. We ended up with these 12 vectors, these levers you can pull. The realization was what we call Chasm 1, where you built your first prototype. Only some of those levers matter. Turns out Chasm 2, where you're trying to prove your product, everything matters. All 12 vectors matter. That's why it's so difficult. If you could double the success rate for commercialization around Chasm 2, the UK economy would be billions and billions of dollars in the positive, and we would get innovations into the NHS faster.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Inside Health Innovation podcast. I'm Karina Malhotra, your host, and today's episode is a special one. We will be talking to Uday Phadke, the co-founder of Triple Chasm. And if you've ever wondered why it's so hard to sell innovation to the NHS, or what it really takes to scale your great ideas and innovations and bring it to the healthcare market, you're going to want to stick around. Uday doesn't hold back. He has years of experience in this space, and he is not afraid to talk about the uncomfortable truths. We talk about the big players, the barriers for small companies and innovators, and why running real-world experiments might be the way forward. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Hi Uday, welcome to Inside Health Innovation podcast.
Great to be here today, Karina.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us your time. As I've already said in my introduction, I really enjoyed doing the Commercialization Academy with you and the other folk at Triple Chasm. So I'm very excited about all the things that we're going to explore today. I'll start with the question that I ask all the innovators. So before you, Uday, mostly my guests have been the innovators or the entrepreneurs or the founders of companies that are working to bring innovation into the health industry. You've got a varied background, which we'll explore shortly. But I really want to understand from your perspective, what does the word innovation mean to you?
So that's a great question. In a sense, it's actually a very difficult question to answer. To me, innovation means doing something new. I mean, that's the shortest answer I can give you, doing something new. But then I have to kind of calibrate that by saying to you that innovation comes in different shapes and forms, right? And I could quote you a couple of people who might bring this to life. One is a man called Akio Morita, who was the founder of Sony, inventor of all the Sony devices, cameras, phones, play recorders.
That's what we're using today.
Yeah, we all. And Akio Morita gave a talk in London in 1992, and it was called S does not equal T does not equal I, and which meant science is not the same as technology. And technology is not the same as innovation, right? And so he was talking about how innovation is something that can bring about change fundamentally, right?
Yeah.
And since we're talking about the health service and health-related issues, in this context, innovation can either mean something new, very focused, like a new technology or a new product, or it can mean changes to the process.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, I guess a lot of work we've done has focused on the process first, and only now we've come into perhaps the product side of things as well. No, that's really interesting, and a very interesting anecdote, which I know with you we'll have plenty of today. So I'm very excited about that part as well. So Uday, let's talk about your journey all the way to Triple Chasm. You worked over your career, from what I can sort of grasp, high-tech businesses, teaching innovation, mentoring global company CEOs and executives. Just tell us a potted history of how you've sort of taken yourself on this journey from perhaps starting engineering at Trinity College at Cambridge all the way to what you do now, which is Triple Chasm.
So maybe I'd chop it up into three.
Yeah.
Because Cicero had it right. He had the theory of threes.
Yeah. That's what a lot of consultants do, isn't it? Management consultants.
But Cicero, who was an orator, wrote the rule of threes.
Yes.
And even Obama's speechwriter used that to construct speeches. So there's some value in it.
Indeed.
But there's sort of three things. The first is really, if you like, my early academic career. And you may be surprised, in the light of the fact we're sitting here talking about healthcare, that my degree was actually in engineering maths, and then my PhD was in aerospace.
Right.
So I was literally a rocket scientist. Worked in the US and here, and then I got involved in trying to understand how technology brings about change. The second phase of my career, if you like, was in consulting, technology consultants, other companies, and I was involved in setting up some of the early consulting companies in Cambridge, some of which are still around today.
Right.
And that was great, because that was devising new products, new services based on innovation for other people, usually large corporates. And so that was fascinating, that second part of the journey.
Yeah.
And then the third part of the journey really was becoming a mainstream actor in the innovation journey, doing my own startup, doing multiple startups, helping different startups. And you mentioned the Triple Chasm. That really came about because we were sitting there one day, my colleagues and I, and we thought, what have we actually learned through all these years of screwing up in everything we do? And we thought, let's collect some real data and try and find how growth happens. And that's how the Triple Chasm model was born, based on real data.
Right. And so you've obviously talked about these sort of three phases of your journey. What was your favorite? What have you enjoyed the most?
So that's an interesting question. I think I've actually enjoyed all aspects of it. And the common thread that links them all together is the idea of working with stuff which is going to change the world.
Yeah.
So I'm not very good when it comes to turning the handle and doing the same thing again and again. And I think that's the key, is always focusing on what's next.
Yes. And you've talked about how you were sort of almost in the startup zone yourself, leading them, etc. And now in Triple Chasm, you kind of help other startups learn from, as you say, all the research that you've done. What have you enjoyed more, the teaching and the nurturing space, or doing it yourself and making those mistakes, or indeed the successes that come with a company like that?
So that's an interesting question. It's a very different experience.
Yes.
Being at the coalface and doing it yourself.
Yeah.
And worrying about cash flow and where the next bit of revenue is going to come from. But I would say the most enjoyable thing is actually helping other people to do stuff, to help them grow. That's somehow more satisfying, because you think, you know what, we can amplify our learnings.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good way to look at it. And I guess, I mean, you get to work across so many different types of solutions to different problems and different pain points. Whereas perhaps if you're in a startup, it's perhaps a very sort of focused, narrow focus. Whereas now you have this really broad focus, which I can see being enjoyable when you have the experience that you have behind you, I guess.
Yeah, so I think There are two things. One is being able to play with lots of different technology.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, exciting, because
Yeah.
there's so much change going on all the time.
Mm.
And so the ability to work with different kinds of technology is really interesting.
Yeah.
And the other is thinking about how that technology or the insight is applied to different market spaces.
Mm.
And sometimes people forget that, in terms of, for example, AI is very fashionable right now. People talk about AI.
Yeah.
But application of AI in healthcare, say diagnostics, is very different from using AI to, say, generate new imagery for
Yes.
movies.
Mm.
We all know about all the things that people are trying to avoid in the entertainment industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact that technology can be applied in very different ways,
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I bet it is. And so you come from such a varied background. At the moment with Triple Chasm, do you focus efforts in healthcare? Because obviously that's how I know you, supporting healthcare innovation and tech companies. Or do you work more broadly?
No, I mean, I personally, I work quite broadly,
Mm.
and we're involved in a number of market spaces. And so we've done a lot of work in media and entertainment. I could bore you to death with details about how Google versus Amazon will shape up.
Right.
So media and entertainment is one. The other is an agri-food.
Right.
And the third is healthcare, very big.
Yeah.
And then completely by accident recently, we've been sucked into looking at the defense and cybersecurity space.
Right. Right.
But mainly as a result of events that none of us could control, namely the war in the east of Europe.
Yeah, no, of course.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's so I cover lots of different stuff.
Yeah.
And also in terms of, but if there's a common theme, it's trying to think about how you commercialize ideas.
Yes.
And so I think the place where we're all focusing on is looking at the later stages of innovation, because there's a lot of emphasis on early stage innovation. Government ministers standing up and saying, "Oh, we believe in growth, we believe in innovation," as if one will naturally lead to the other. As you and I know,
yes, it's
actually
not.
turning these ideas into revenues, into sustainable revenues and business models is hard work. So the main focus right now is actually on commercialization. So I wear this other hat. I'm on the board of the Research Development Society, which is an organization. It's a think tank essentially for commercialization.
Right.
Because we took over and reinvented a very old creation. It was called the Research Development Society in 1968.
Right.
Had all the directors of all the big UK corporates when we had big corporates.
Right.
And they were all members of this thing. And Prince Philip was the patron.
Right.
So you can see you can get a mental picture of the kind of people who went to dinners in these clubs.
Yes.
And we took it and we turned it round, and we're focusing now on growth companies,
right,
as a voice for growth companies in the UK economy.
That's fantastic. So let's sort of hone in on the healthcare space. Part of the reason why you were supporting, I imagine, the Health Innovation Network is because commercialization and selling to the NHS is hard. And obviously I've got my views on it, and various people I speak to in this network of health tech entrepreneurs have lots of thoughts on it. But with your sort of really broad experience, but equally just years of experience doing this and understanding companies and commercialization, I'd really like to hear your summary of what are those primary reasons or barriers. Why is it so hard to sell to the NHS?
Okay, so I'll slightly rephrase your question.
Please, feel free.
By pointing out, firstly, that we have a very strong science and technology ecosystem in the UK, where we have very, very strong advantages in life sciences in particular. And so we should be thinking about how those advantages are turned into commercial impact, not just for the NHS, but for the broader healthcare industry globally.
Yeah.
Because the NHS is about 3% of the global healthcare market. It's nice to remind ourselves of that sometimes.
Yeah.
And so the growth agenda, with seeing the NHS as if you like call it a cheerleader or an early adopter in theory, is the right model, because it then feeds into the national agenda of improving healthcare provision, but also into the bigger picture around creating growth, the growth picture.
Yeah.
And so in terms of why now, I think we're poised at a very interesting point in time because technology is enabling lots of things
Yes.
that previously were not possible at cost points, which were also previously not feasible.
True.
And so the opportunity is very big, but it means understanding some of the finer detail of how those innovations are translated into real impact.
Yeah.
And in practical terms, then that means engaging with the NHS, trying to understand use of data, trying to understand regulation, trying to understand clinical trials and management. We might go into that in a moment, but that's the kind of the broader picture.
Yeah. And I guess why is there a feeling that it's really hard to sell to the NHS from your perspective?
Okay, it's because historically, the NHS, I think, is the second largest employer in the world after Indian Railways.
Indian Railways, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
And so if you have a very large organization, then the way large organizations behave is through very well written down formulae for devolved authority, devolved power, etc.
Yeah.
So part of what we're seeing in terms of the selling to the NHS, if you look from the other side, the procurement challenge for the NHS is that its fallback routine in any situation is to fall back on structure and process. So it behaves like a big company. Even though successive changes have tried to chop the NHS up into different facets. So, you have, even within secondary and primary healthcare, you have lots of different incarnations.
Yes.
Fund holding practices, you have trusts and integrated trusts,
PCNs.
PCNs. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But so that paradoxically, that's part of the problem, because you go from an organization which was very monolithic in its buying behavior, and now it's very fragmented, and that fragmentation has led to lots of different types of buying behavior.
Yes.
That's why it's so hard, because the people who run these organizations are trying very hard to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But their instruction booklet for how to do this does not include right now any kind of bias towards encouraging small and medium-sized enterprises and the innovation around them.
Yeah.
So one of the things people have been pushing for the last decade at least is to say large organizations, starting with NHS, 30% of everything they buy, they should buy from companies which employ less than 100 people. Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful transformative effect?
Yeah.
Because so many small players who don't get a look in would suddenly find they have government as a customer that would help them.
Yeah.
Instead, what do? We deal with the very big guys who have no interest in the UK national interest in any way. And they also they're surrounded by outriders, the big management consultancies who are guiding government towards saying, no, you must do this, you must buy in this way. There is no evidence from all the work we've done that procurement strategy actually gets better product at a better price point, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I was discussing exactly this with somebody the other day, where we were talking about how essentially this procurement infrastructure does not encourage innovation or embracing innovations for two reasons. The frameworks and all of those kinds of things perhaps allow the big players or the players who've been there already to stay on for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, etc. And that doesn't give them any incentive to innovate, to keep moving forward or creating new value for their customer, the government and the public sector. So that's one reason. And it also sort of doesn't allow the small, medium enterprises to break through. So it's stifling them from that perspective, and it's not letting the old bigger players innovate or incentivize them to innovate. So in both those ways, there's no innovation coming through the door. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So I'd probably say something slightly controversial.
Yeah.
Which is that
I was hoping you would.
Which is that most big corporations, most of them, are pretty bad at innovation, right? And we know that. I'd mentioned earlier the R&D directors of these companies in the 60s and 70s. Even then, they recognized that big guys weren't very good.
Yeah.
And they were trying to encourage and find out ways of bringing new innovations in. And if you look at the senior leadership of all the top players in the life sciences, pharma space, etc., then currently their strategy seems to be to monitor what some of the younger agile players are doing and be ready to pounce to acquire those companies and their innovations and their technology, or to kill it in some cases, which has happened.
Yeah.
And so we have this situation where the big guys are not doing enough. And if you're going to encourage smaller companies to play, you've got to find ways of creating a more level playing field.
Yeah.
And at the moment, there is no motivation. There's no incentive for senior civil servants to change the process.
Yeah.
And as you know, what happens is that we have. I mean, we should also talk about technology sovereignty. We have a challenge here. When you look at the NHS and you look at the innovations in biopharma, new drugs, new therapies, and you look at data and how it's handled and processed, the whole AI revolution, we have a lot of innovation going on in this country, but most of it is not getting anywhere near the NHS until it's scooped up by big players. You yourself have heard the story about the advice to lots of players in the UK space that they should relocate to North America, because that would somehow mysteriously and magically help them to do better at home. And everybody knows the story of Babylon. That should be a really kind of salutary lesson for what happens when you don't think through what the issues are.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, because I guess what I'm also hearing you talk about in this space is we've talked about procurement challenges and obviously, not particularly creating an environment where civil servants, government, public sector in general is open to this kind of innovation. What part do you think cautiousness or risk aversiveness of, we're the NHS, we have to protect public funds, but equally patients come to harm, that kind of risk aversiveness, and cautiousness is the right thing to have in that kind of space. What kind of role does that play in creating some of this reliance on the bigger players? Because, you might be a chief exec thinking, well, if I go with, a bigger company, a PwC over a smaller consultancy, equally, if I go for a big named tech provider versus a small enterprise, I'm in safer hands because they're proven and they've got, they've just got more gravitas behind them. And therefore, why should I take that risk?
So that's a very interesting question. This is how does the NHS manage risk?
Yeah.
And how do you mitigate that risk? And the problem there is that there isn't a proper understanding of risk, in my view, right? People are looking at the wrong things.
Right.
And so the kind of so-called risk aversion doesn't work very well for the NHS. And if you look in the US, which is supposed to be a free market, but it isn't actually. If you look at the market in the US, then there is this whole supposed the regulatory checks and balances and how the market will intervene to do stuff, and how insurers and the funding of healthcare in those countries will drive some of the behaviors in terms of new innovations.
Yeah.
So I think the risk thing is kind of interesting, because I don't think that I think we're worrying about risk in the wrong places. That's my view. I mean, we could actually expand on that quite a lot, because it depends on whether you're trying to look at risk in secondary, tertiary healthcare in terms of deployment of new therapies, or whether you're looking at the level of risk in terms of earlier stage diagnostics. And I think some of the stuff that the NHS has been saying about changing the balance so that you shift the burden upstream so that we're actually catching things before they become a problem. Yeah. The actual risk is much lower there.
Yes.
And I think there's an opportunity for the NHS to actually be much more agile and much less risk averse, if you like, in that situation.
So, when you talk about upstream having less sort of clinical safety challenges, if you will, or risks, is more at prevention stage, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely. Stories about prevention and call it the wellness debate overall, upstream. And I think there are so many of the new innovations, science and tech-based innovations, which could be deployed earlier on in order to understand wellness, to diagnose conditions. That could be done with a much lower risk profile.
Yes.
But the procurement process within the NHS is geared towards procurement for the secondary and tertiary healthcare and therapies. So they apply this test for reliability and safety, which may be appropriate for much, much later stages
Yes.
of the process. And if you look at how you get innovation, you're trying to sell to the NHS, where is it? There are some GP fund holding practices, for example, who are actually innovating and taking some of the risk earlier on.
Yeah.
But they're a small part of the whole procurement journey, as you know.
Yeah.
And the big thing, my big bugbear is this whole question about data and electronic patient records and EPR. And that's something I think that's the key to unlocking some of the innovation. Because you could actually put a lot more power into the hands of smaller companies rather than think about a single monolithic database.
How do you see that working?
How do I see that working? I think the government's got to think differently.
Yeah.
And they've got to think differently because at the moment everything is geared towards views about what I call one-size-fits-all models.
Yeah.
And so you get curious situations such as the announcement last week about the National Data Service, right, with 100 million from the Wellcome Trust and maybe up to 500 million from the UK government.
Yeah,
up to is the
we
keyword.
noticed the up to.
Why put that number in? Yeah, but the interesting thing there is what exactly is this National Data Service going to do? Who's providing the data? Have we solved the problem around patient consent, patient data? Have we even tried to think about the problem of the taxonomy for how data is labeled, tagged, and structured?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so from what I've read so far. So we like the big announcements and the big things, but actually the devil's in the detail here.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many smaller companies working with data, working with AI in the UK. My simple suggestion would be to the government, why not set up a consortium with these small players and give the consortium a contract instead of awarding contracts across the pond to people like Palantir and others who have a very different set of ideological goals compared to, say, the present government.
That's really interesting. So what you're talking about is potentially unlocking the data that exists within these EPRs, obviously recognizing the patient consent and sort of resolving that first, but then utilizing that data effectively, using, especially now with the power of AI, the kind of insights we could gain could be huge, right?
They could be massive.
Yeah.
But you need to think about this. And I don't think designing grand schemes is the way. I mean, when you read this announcement, it's going to be sometime next year before anything happens. That's 2 years away. And you think the problem is now. What's stopping you collecting together? And you could, if you worried as the NHS sometimes is about process and tendering, you could invite people from the industry to say, we'd like to be part of a consortium. This is what we bring. And then you take a unit of people, take them outside the procurement engine of the NHS and say, you're running a project and your job is to deliver the following things. And you could actually do something with the proviso that you're going to deliver some results before this so-called National Data Service is up and running. Because how can we talk about 1-2 year timeframes when things are changing literally by the hour?
I know, especially with technologies like AI now coming from everywhere in every application. To consider doing something 2 years hence feels quite late, when you're right, like those insights are what we need today when the challenges in the NHS are quite acute at the moment, as we all kind of know. And, there's this big drive to reduce the financial pressure within the NHS. Every organisation within the NHS has to make savings. Obviously, we know about the restructure and the amount of job losses that are happening. But more than that, even in hospitals, there's an expectation to cut corporate staff. How can you do all of those things without some fast-paced innovation coming in to support those systems at the same time, solve those problems of waiting times and various other things? It's quite hard to achieve all of that when suddenly you're also in this really uncertain, I've got to kind of, let go of this many staff and solve all of these problems and make the savings. I think it's almost all of those goals might be the right ones. And, I'm all for trimming the fat, as it were, in the organization. But the headspace is what we're losing. So those senior leaders within the NHS are now thinking, I'm just so busy with all this, I haven't got time for taking on something brand new, change, innovation, all of that kind of stuff, because I'm too busy doing my day job, as it were, you know?
Yeah, I mean, but if you think back to some of the changes,
Yeah.
and if you think back to before Andrew Lansley announced his, in my personal view, daft scheme, right?
I think not many people disagree with you.
Yeah,
on that,
I bet they don't. But I mean, the thing is, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
Because there's a. I remember many years ago, I was in a company which was in deep distress, and I was working there. And they just announced another reorganization. And there was a cartoon pasted on the walls. You probably all have, maybe many people have seen it. And there's a picture underneath the caption says, "Rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic." Right? And the thing is that when you're struggling, when things are tough, then you've got to think about, maybe this is another way to think about innovation, is what can I do that's different?
Yeah.
Because you do all the obvious things. Management consultants will come and tell you that if you're reducing headcount. You talk to Booz or McKinsey, they have a crib sheet for how to do headcount reduction, right?
Yeah.
But where does that get you? I think you need the antidote to it, which is you need to start creating something.
Yeah.
And unless you're doing that at the same time,
Yeah.
all you've done after 2 years is wasted a lot of money, sacked a lot of people, reduced efficiency, and then everybody will try and say, "Oh gosh, that was a mistake. Let's reorganize again."
Yeah.
So I think that there is a lot to be said for doing more. I mean, there are lots of lessons in other countries for how to do this. If you look at China, if you look at India, you look at Indonesia, most of them actually in the Asia-Pac region, some in Scandinavia.
So just give us an example.
So for example, if you look at China in the space around advanced computing, right? They could see what was happening was that the US was putting bigger and bigger burdens on the cost of hardware, making it much, much harder for them to do stuff. So what do you end up with this? You end up with DeepSeek, right? Which was a new way of looking at data and models in order to increase computational efficiency for AI. And then, of course, the response from all the people who've been encouraging billions of dollars worth of funding is, "Oh, they must have stolen our hardware and siphoned it away," or they're lying. But I think so. That's an example in the aerospace. In the healthcare and biotech space, the other interesting example is India. Because if you look 10 years ago, India was nowhere in terms of innovation around the biotech, life sciences, new therapies, etc. And they had the Department of Biotechnology, which was different from the Health Ministry, which is interesting. So the people responsible for delivering healthcare were separated from the people responsible for creating new things.
Right.
And Department of Biotechnology had a woman scientist. She was actually a medic who moved back from the US, and she said she wanted to build an innovation ecosystem. And so some of us in the UK were involved, only partially because Boris Johnson played cricket on a beach in Bombay with Modi and said, "We'll help you." But most of it was done by the strategic team around the Indian senior government in Delhi.
Right.
And they decided they were going to build 1,000 incubators around India and train people to staff and run them.
Wow.
What do we have today? If you go to Bangalore, the National Centre for Biological Sciences has about 10 flagship institutes who would do far better job of commercializing innovation than any of our catapults have ever done, right, in the UK. And for example, there's a place called CCAB, Centre for Cellular and Molecular Platforms.
Right.
They've spun out 50 new companies, and they have contracts with parts of the health system in India to deliver innovation. During COVID, the state government of Kerala were the first people to deploy, as you probably know, COVID vaccine, based on homegrown development. And if you look at all the discussions about vaccines and antimicrobial resistance, AMR, our AMR teams now are actually collaborating with the teams in Bangalore. And they come back and say, gosh, they're a bit far out, aren't they, in terms of the science and deployment. So same challenges, safety, risk assessment, efficacy. It's not that they lowered the standards for risk. It's not that all the people on their trials are dying or anything like that. It's just a different mindset.
And the different mindset is, let's grow a lot of this stuff in-house, as it were. Encourage it, give it the infrastructure it needs to then be competing on a global scale.
Absolutely.
And I guess, I mean, do you feel like almost like the NHS and the way it's organized? So it is, a public sector organization. We're different, I guess, from countries like US and India in how our healthcare is delivered in that way. does that almost sort of not give us even a bigger opportunity? The fact that we are, yes, appreciate there's obviously 900 some mini organizations underneath the NHS banner, but having that kind of ability to centralize anything that we might want to in terms of solution, etc., that we are quite well placed to almost encourage that kind of innovation and then make our own global companies, as it were.
In theory.
Yes.
In theory.
In theory.
Yeah,
yes.
in theory, because it's the way in which that organization works that's the challenge.
Yeah.
And so I was talking about India a moment ago, and so maybe just pick on India. India has a public healthcare system, which is perceived nationally probably as being less good than some of the privatized healthcare system. Perceived, I say, as being less good. Also, like in the NHS.
It's true. I mean, I I don't know if we've talked about this before, but I grew up in India till I was 16.
Wow,
so I only moved to the country with my family when I was 16. And never did I or any of my family set foot into a public healthcare system because it was indeed very clearly perceived as not good. And if you can afford private, why wouldn't you go private?
So it's interesting. It's about the level of support and level of confidence. Because I probably haven't told this. I grew up in the middle of Africa, in East Africa.
Right. Yeah.
And growing up, I would have. There was very little. People would go to the best place. So in other words, they might go and see a GP who was in private practice, but when they wanted some hospital procedure, they would probably go to the main teaching hospital linked to the university, and which was state funded, because they were making a judgment about where to get the best quality of care for the lowest risk. And so I think here we have, that's not, we don't want to paint a rosy picture. If you look in India, then the public hospital structure is creaking, and the private sector is being buttressed because of the growing size of the middle class.
Yes.
And so there's a lot more disposable income. So the economics are different. Here we have a situation where post-Second World War, we had the whole idea of universal provision by the NHS meant that we have a different mindset about healthcare. But I think that, so I don't think there's a simple answer. But I actually think we need to run some experiments for how to do this kind of innovation.
Right.
Rather than try and design some grand scheme which will work everywhere. Maybe it won't. But if we design some experiments in certain areas, maybe pick an area, I don't know, maybe cardiac health or something like that. Pick an area and say, how can we get better results? And maybe let's just experiment. Let's actually have a heterogeneous approach where we will look at maybe specialist provision, say from Papworth and other places like that in the UK, but combine that with some of the other providers who are working in the sector. Because what you find at the moment in the UK is that there's an element of the less risky procedures and therefore the more economically profitable procedures being siphoned off into private healthcare.
Yes.
And you've probably seen that more than I have.
Yeah.
But I actually think we need to experiment. If it was one thing I would probably say to the Minister of Health, I would say, let's run some decent sized experiments. Let's pick one or two areas where we think we can make a difference.
Yeah.
And we have a lesson there. Exactly what happened with the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yeah.
That was an experiment.
Yeah.
Which came good.
Yeah.
Because there was ad hoc decisions made, practical judgments made about how the regulation would need to work, how the funding would need to work. Yeah. I heard something interesting the other day. I heard that the woman who actually looked after the vaccine program, Kate Bingham, there was a suggestion that they should put Kate Bingham in charge of the rearrangement.
Right.
I think she saw that coming from a distance and said, I've got expertise in certain areas, but not in many others.
Fair enough. But
I think we need something new.
Yeah. Well, I think that is really true, isn't it? And just sort of not to sort of dwell on the subject of the FDP solution that obviously has been brought in from a company from across the pond, as we know, from America. And I appreciate obviously that I think the concept of the FDP is such a great idea. We all agree that is what will get us all those great insights that we hope to get in the future. But the procurement and now the sort of implementation of this platform, I guess, is more interesting to speak about. But I just wanted to talk about the procurement side first. So, you gave this really interesting almost idea to the government about, why don't you get a consortium of smaller companies together and get them to come up with a solution like that? Do you think that going across the pond to obviously these bigger players and I appreciate the backstory as well, that, they helped during COVID, and I'm sure that helped us in some way, shape or form. But on the basis of that, I mean, even before the procurement exercise finished, everybody was talking about Palantir is going to win this contract. I guess, what could the government have done differently in that scenario where they obviously suddenly felt after COVID, we need an FDP and we need it now? Sort of encouraging that sort of bring these smaller players together and build a consortium. Do you think that would have been really hard for them to do? And if not, what is it a mindset thing only? Or is there something bigger in infrastructure that needs to shift in order to allow them to experiment in that way?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. I mean, let's try and unpack it.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's a long one as well.
Yeah, because I think there's the idea of federated data structure makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea, but ask ourselves what a federation actually means and how a federation operates. Because when you have a federation, it implies it's some kind of coalition of groups of people.
Yeah.
Who are basically come together to form a federation.
True.
And the rules of how the federation behaves change depending on the local conditions. So you could think about the United States as a federation of states. And look at even today, the mess between what the states think they're in charge of versus the center.
Yes.
So there's a very interesting balance going on there. And if you look at other places which have slightly different constitutions, like India, for example, which is a federal model and federal state, but there are certain powers reserved for the unitary state to intervene.
The central government.
Central government. And so if you're going to have a federated data structure, you've got to understand where the real impact is going to be delivered and where the value is coming from. In other words, the rules governing the federation should reflect conditions on the ground.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when that doesn't happen, what you have is a situation where it's called a federated data platform, but it's actually heavily mandated from one place.
Yes.
Right? So it's great to say we have a federated data platform, federated in the sense that people are free to use it, but within prescribed guidelines.
Yes.
Right? So I'd question that element.
Calling it that.
Yeah,
yes.
Calling it a federated. As a label, it's great. The intent is very good, is very clear, but the way it's applied is not. The second question, so that's about structure and how you organize, and that could be a more democratic structure. It's kind of slightly weird that a country and a government and the people who believe in this kind of plurality and equality of provision, etc., have chosen to basically allow one single player to determine and dominate and define what should happen, right? So ideologically, that's it. Sort of, or aesthetically, it doesn't seem to fit quite rightly, right? The second point, which is one I think which is important, and we're now seeing evidence of that, is the idea of technological sovereignty, which is that if your fundamental operation for anything that you do is determined by the way in which that data, that piece of technology or that solution is managed and delivered, and if it's fundamental to your national security, then is it right? I mean, we're now seeing shades of the kind of debate about the for example, the British Steel furnace in Scunthorpe, and questions around were we right to have sold this asset to a Chinese player? Right? And when you look at the evidence, it was a fairly narrow scheme of things. It probably there wasn't a big ideological case. It doesn't determine what happens in Wales. It doesn't determine what happens in London. So to that extent, strategically, if you like, the overall political case on the basis of national sovereignty is not there. We do, however, have a huge issue around technological sovereignty, around the use of data and the use of things like AI, right? And so I think we need to be very careful about how we do that. And especially in a situation where we have 4 or 5 very big tech players, all based in North America, who have basically scraped the worldwide everybody's data in order to create some new models, right? So and maybe if we were such powerful allies for life, maybe it would matter less. But it's not clear who our allies are anymore. And when that happens, it makes you think about it. We've had to think about it, I think, for the first time in a long time.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you look at countries in Africa, if you look in South Africa, if you look in Indonesia and places like that, they've had to think about this for quite a while. And the consequences, for example, for South Africa of undertaking some of the policy decisions they made could be economically very dire because of the way they can be punished by the US government, already have been punished.
Yeah.
But the state of technology, AI expertise, etc., in Southern Africa is very, very strong. They have a very strong indigenous science and technology base. So they've made decisions. So I think there's this question of technological sovereignty plays its part there. So you have the stuff of how does a federated structure work? What is in the country's interest and the national interest? And then the third, which is a pragmatic, practical question, which says, is this going to get us to where we need to be faster?
Yeah.
Right? Because if it did, maybe all those other things, you might put them on the side.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence that's going to happen. From what I hear, Palantir are going around acting like a management consultant, asking, nothing wrong with doing that. But why are we saying we have this company that has the deep expertise to do something when then they're turning around and we're providing a learning environment for them, right? And then I have to sort of personally, I fret about the fact that the company, I know they claim they helped us out during COVID big time, but a lot of other players could have done the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There wasn't a unique situation. And Palantir, you have to remember, is being founded by the tech bros who are now in the ascendancy. So I think there's a security issue there.
I suppose, what I guess we're not talking about enough, not today because we are here, but in the sort of public sphere is, do they really have access to all our healthcare data now? Or is it safe? Is it safe in our hands? But you've talked about obviously how there are some big players who've scraped data from everywhere to help build models, which they are now capitalizing on. And a lot of those are coming from North America. And of course, this company has come from there as well. Do you worry that that's what might happen here?
I think there's a big danger of that happening because you can't control this. And I'm looking to see what the RIO is going to do in this respect, the new Regulatory Innovation Office, because they've been tasked with supposedly thinking the unthinkable in terms of regulation,
right?
And they've got to have work cut out because they have to think about the role. What role does the MHRA play, for example, if they're working at device level? Do they have any role in regulating the use of AI? Who regulates data usage? I'm not clear at the moment who regulates data usage in the UK. We've had certain experiments we've learned. I mean, you may remember 5 years ago, we had Genomics England, which was supposed to own and capitalize on all the genomic data of the UK population. And they were going to have revenues of 500 million plus within 5 or 6 years. Genomics England was shut down on commercial grounds because they'd spent a lot of money and nothing had happened. We've got various other bodies, and I don't see how they're linked together. We've got UK Biobank. Right, we've got this new body announced by the government recently.
The additional funding.
We've got the Federated Data Platform initiative. All three of these people can't all be responsible for the policy of how data is held, owned, managed, and exploited. There is something to look back on, which you may or may not remember. But when the big search was on to create the database to basically map the human genome, right? There were two projects competing for mapping the whole human genome.
Right.
And there was a team out of the Sanger Institute, Tim Sulston's team, and there was Craig Ventnor's group out of MIT. And Craig Ventnor basically said they were going to patent the human DNA structure, even though it would be a discovery. They were going to patent it.
Right.
And the crowd at the Sanger Institute said when they were going to publish as soon as they got them, they were going to put this was open domain knowledge.
Yeah.
And Sanger won this battle with weeks to spare. And Craig Ventnor, you might find the quote somewhere, and if it's still around.
Yeah.
Craig Ventnor basically accused these scientists of damaging the potential revenue for a whole bunch of life scientists going forward, because there's an ideological issue here, because the Sanger team felt that all this information should be available to every citizen in the world and not controlled by the Californian Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court in terms of its ownership.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And
so we've got. I think we're in a very interesting point in time. But if I apply the pragmatic test, I think that maybe it's difficult for the policymakers in the NHS to get their heads around it, because it's not an easy thing.
No.
We work in this space. We're asking ourselves all these questions. But when you're faced with a situation where we're going down a particular route, what you typically, if you're trying to manage risk, talk to any investment banker. What they do is they spread the risk around.
Yeah.
And one way of spreading the risk around is to run an experiment, maybe 2 or 3 experiments in the UK, because that way, when you get up into a situation where, say, these people from the North America start to dictate terms, which they will. If you have a monopoly, that's what all monopolists do.
Yeah.
Then you have some alternatives up your sleeve.
Yes.
So I actually think that's what we should be doing in the NHS.
And that's a really interesting way to kind of almost sell that new experimental structure to the NHS, right? Because it's true. We all know there are some big players spread across NHS organisations. Obviously, we've talked about one, but all the big EPRs, for example.
Yeah.
And in our work, in our consultancy, we do a lot of work with frontline organisations, especially acute providers, improve their data. And when we're talking about, there's some challenge within the EPR that's not allowing us to maybe record it appropriately or capture it in the right point. And when we say, well, let's talk to the EPR provider to make a change, well, that's just, they'll never do that. Or, the priority list is so long that it takes years to get to the top of the list to get a change done. On this EPR, which is probably costing, it costs like 20 million plus a year or something like that to have those contracts for these NHS organizations, yet they have such little influence in changing it. And that has always baffled me. And I just thought, I've just not understood the commercial model here. But you would think that, I'm the customer. You provide me a tech product which is not working for me and I want to make a change. That should happen fairly quickly. Otherwise, I stop your contract. Yeah. But it's almost too painful to get away from them now. We're so sort of, or certainly NHS organizations feel that they are so embedded that it's just change has just felt like an absolute nightmare. So it does mean that it feels like we are often in the control of these bigger players, and the influence that they have is way greater than the customer, which is the NHS.
Yeah, no, but you're absolutely right. I mean, if you were a consumer, if you were buying running shoes, and if the shoe was causing sores on the inside of your foot, you would stop buying those shoes, right? There isn't an equivalent mechanism here in terms of being able to hold suppliers to account. And that kind of thing is very hard if you've got a history of how contracts were negotiated and you've got a battery of lawyers who were responsible for drafting those contracts. But I think that the thing is that if you don't have many options, then you're forced into the situation that you're in. One of the things I'm suggesting is why doesn't the NHS take out an option by way of some experiments in specific areas? And it could be quite narrow and focused. It could be that they're going to change the way, for example, in which pediatric health is managed. Right. They could be somewhere they could look at, and they could look at how broad they wanted. They could look at all the integrated data. They could look at genomic data, phenotype, genotype data, disease data, but they could restrict it to, say, a particular age group and say, this is what we're going to do. And I think something like that would really provide dividends. I mean, separately, I think, we're looking at what we call the Chasm 2 challenge. Maybe we'll come on to that in a moment.
That's next.
But it's about about running some experiments, because I think that you could put together a group of hospitals, trusts, why not link up some primary, secondary healthcare areas
Yeah.
and some companies that are working with maybe 2 or 3 different EPRs. So you're avoiding the mistakes of the previous time.
Yeah.
And you actually run this. And I bet you that if you said this is the solution we're trying to provide,
Yeah.
they would beat the big players' ability to deliver
Yeah.
by at least 50% in
Yeah.
terms of time.
Yeah. Well, no, I definitely support that.
Yeah.
And what what role do you think health innovation networks can play in that? Can they be the people bringing these sort of experimental cases together?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a very interesting question because the health innovation networks were originally called they were set up as test beds. You may remember this.
Academic health science
networks, and the idea was there were ideas in academia that could be turned into solutions products in health services. And so the way the academic health science networks were conceived was about fast tracking innovation.
Yeah.
Right. So they were going to be test beds for doing that.
Yeah.
And I remember when they were first announced, I was very excited because I thought, oh, great, a test bed.
Yeah.
And we work very closely with the innovation team in East of England. Right. And we were talking about how we could design and run trials to bring innovations to market very fast.
Yeah.
And of course, none of that happened. There are lots of reasons we could spend many hours discussing what happened. But the thing is that now I hear there's lots of questions about have we got too many health innovation networks?
15 now.
But the emphasis is always on the stuff about, okay, how do we reduce costs? The thing is, if you said actually that we're going to ask the health innovation networks to tackle specific things, you could combine some of those. You could create a test bed.
Yeah.
Because if you want to create a real test bed, you put the primary, secondary, tertiary healthcare teams into the test bed, along with the companies building the innovations.
Yeah.
And you have a specific outcome.
Yeah.
So it's focused not on inputs, but on outputs.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get me started on my big bugbear about how all we do is measure inputs, not outputs. Same with funding and investment. We'll big up how much money was raised by this company.
Yes.
What I'm much more interested in is what came out the other end.
Did your valuation come true in about 18 months before anything else? No, that's been such an interesting discussion all through because I suppose having been part of some of the Health Innovation Network ecosystems, I found them really helpful in one way, which is obviously running those accelerator programs and all of those kind of things. But I think the challenge I've always experienced as somebody who's coming with an innovation to those programs, perhaps, is that that perhaps matchmaking not just with individual sort of people who can buy my solution, but perhaps matchmaking with a wider ecosystem, because together we might have a bigger solution, bigger dividends to offer, as we are all sort of solving our very niche problems. And I guess that's the value, that I know my niche problem incredibly well, and somebody over there will know their niche problem incredibly well. And they are developing this amazing solution there. I'm developing a solution which I'd like to call amazing too, here. And if you put us together, that would be great. And perhaps that is not happening enough. And of course, there's 15, and of course, I appreciate the localization is important in the NHS. But it does feel like, you're kind of starting again. When I go to a different health innovation network, I start again from the top. Perhaps it's more the sort of overcoming the, now how do we get this embedded? How do we sell it? How do we commercialize it almost, I guess, is the bit that that's why I found the program with you guys really useful, because it got me thinking in a lot of other ways, and that sort of market space. So and grant fundings, for example, ask you to go out and find all these partners. Where's the support to help you find them? And that is the bit. And NIHR, SBRI, all of these grants are great, and they all talk about yes, we can help link you with other academic organizations, etc. if you don't have that. But it's very hard to, when the grant has been announced, to suddenly start looking for it. It would be really good at the very start of the journey, when we join something like a Health Innovation Network program, to automatically start looking at, do you need an academic element? Actually go and talk to these organizations now, rather than just when a grant comes up, which is what, often sometimes has felt like certainly in my network that some people end up doing, is just when the grants come out, well, it needs me to have this and now I will go and find it.
So you're describing two different problems, which are both important. One is what I call the lack of joined-upness, which is the key thing. Because I think the HINs, some of the better ones, have actually worked very hard at trying to provide some of this joined-up thinking, trying to bring different people into the conversation, integrating thought processes, ideas. And so I think the ones that have done this really well, you can see how they could do this more effectively if they focused on that even more. So this one is the integration. The second is understanding how innovations are actually commercialized. Because the thing is that there's this kind of binary notion of the world which says we have a great idea, let's work on it. And then at the other end is, oh, have we got enough money for it? Let's get funding in. And so everything that the government, not just our, but lots of governments across the EU and others have historically done is looked at this as a binary problem, which is that we need to fund some technology. So SBRI and some of the other grants from the NHS innovation, they're all focused on very early stages of commercialization. And they've used historically TRL, which is technology readiness level, which is only for good if you're trying to build a prototype. And so if you're looking from a commercialization readiness point of view, it's relatively early, sort of leading up to what we call Chasm 1, which is building your early prototype. And then they forget about what happens in between. And then the other end, they say, oh, we need to get some more money in. And so even the current Treasury mantra is, oh, we need more patient capital, right? Which somehow it's perceived as we have great world-class technology, like in healthcare and life sciences, but then we're short of patient capital. When they're missing the middle piece, which is how you translate that into growth. And I think that's part of the problem. And then if you look and say, how are other countries doing? Are they fully in the same trap? What you see in places in Asia Pac and Japan, in China in particular, and in India, there's a very big emphasis on new products and services, not just new technologies, where they focus on Chasm 2, on that central piece. And we, at the moment, have basically, our only mantra is, why is America better at it than we are? It's a cultural thing. Well, they're not actually better than us. They just have bigger numbers. The percentage conversion rates are just as low as we have, but they do have a lot more money to throw at things. So
it's a bigger economy.
It's a bigger economy, much bigger economy. But then you look at in healthcare. Look at the cost of healthcare in the US.
It's rising quite astronomically.
It's going up dramatically, and it's already much higher. So
and their life expectancy is still a bit lower than us.
I know. So I think that kind of speaks for itself.
No, it's really interesting. So let's bring all of this together. So we talked about all of these challenges and the challenges especially sort of small, medium enterprises face in commercializing in the healthcare space. So you've done a big piece of research that's ended up in the Triple Chasm model. So can you tell us about the research and what the Triple Chasm model is, please?
Okay, so the research really stemmed from the fact that a group of me and my colleagues, we reached a conclusion about 2010 that we seemed to find different ways to screw up every time we did something. And we thought, we're telling other people about how, look at the evidence, look at the data. Why don't we do a data-driven exercise to try and understand how innovation is actually commercialized? So I set up a research program when I was based at the business school in Cambridge at the Judge. And it was quite interesting. There was a cultural learning there because I was also a Cambridge scientist. And the first reaction I got from my old college, from Trinity, was, why are you doing business stuff? As if it was some kind of lower level of activity intellectually, not quite highbrow enough. And we said, no, we're going to look at real data to try and understand growth. And that relaxed them a little bit.
All right.
Okay. But we collected data from over 3,000 companies around the world because we were trying to understand not just what was going on in the UK or in North America or Europe, but globally. And so we collected data from around the world over a period of 7 years, from 2010 to 2017.
Wow.
right? And as we were collecting, we were analyzing data, going back to get more data infilling and stuff. And we covered lots of different market spaces because we wanted to understand were there any systematic differences between agri-food and healthcare and defense. And so we built a very comprehensive model, which we called the mesoeconomic vector model. And we thought we were being clever until we discovered that Joseph Schumpeter, the Austrian economist, had actually coined the word mesoeconomics.
Right. Okay.
Right, in 1948 when he was attacking Maynard Keynes.
Right.
So the model and the work really is a mesoeconomic analysis of how growth actually happens.
Right.
That's fundamentally what it is. So it's a model for understanding how growth happens.
Growth in companies.
Growth in companies, and therefore in the real world, real economy.
Yeah.
Right? And there were two key findings from there. One was understanding what maturity, what the relative maturity of the proposition was. So where were you on your commercialization journey, which we encapsulated as commercialization readiness level. And the second was, I know where I am, but what can I do to change my trajectory?
So how do I move forward?
Yeah,
basically?
and so there we need to understand all the drivers for growth. And we looked at 174 variables, and we used AI to analyze in a time where before AI was fashionable to do this. But we ended up with these 12 vectors, these levers you can pull.
So 12 levers, yeah.
12 levers. 4 of them are external, they're how the market is structured, where you're positioning in that market, who the customer is, and how you reach markets, channels to market, etc.
And what's really interesting about the model, I think, is it's not just here's all the levers and here's your maturity level. It's bringing those two
It's
together.
linking them together. And the realization was that what we called Chasm 1, where you built your first prototype, only some of those levers matter.
Yeah.
Because they matter at that stage in your journey when you're
Yes.
building a prototype. And by the time you get to Chasm 3, when you think you're trying to scale, different things matter, usually like channels, supply chains, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But turns out Chasm 2, where you're trying to prove your product, everything matters. All 12 vectors matter.
Yeah.
That's why it's so difficult.
Yeah.
That's why I've written a blog which said, there is no value or death. There is only Chasm 2. Right?
Exactly. So just to recap then, so it's 3 key chasms at different points of maturity level.
Yep, that's right.
Where you can fall down this chasm and basically never surface again as a company. But what your research shows us is certain levers used appropriately at those different, just when you're approaching that different chasm level of maturity, might save you, basically.
Yeah,
right?
Well, basically, the success rate of people crossing Chasm 1, if you look at the CRO, how good are people? We're over 90% most of the world. So
because that's the very beginning.
You're
and
just building your prototype.
MVP.
Building your prototype. It's so. And when you get to Chasm 3, it's about 90% again because you're just trying to scale into international markets.
But you've already done some of the hard work in the middle.
Guess what the success rate at Chasm 2 is? It's about 10%.
Oof.
So if you could double that or triple that,
yeah.
imagine how much value you could unlock and what you could do.
Yeah.
If you could double the success rate for commercialization around Chasm 2, the UK economy would be billions and billions of dollars in the positive, and we would get innovations into the NHS faster.
So let's talk for a moment then about this second chasm, which is where only 10% companies might survive in. What are perhaps, I know there's obviously quite a few different levers and vectors that apply to you in that space, but what are the top ones that if you had to only pick like top 3, what is it?
So if you're trying to get across Chasm 2, maybe pitch it slightly different away from the vectors because all the vectors matter.
Yeah.
But what matters at that point is that you basically, what do you need to do this? You need a much better understanding of where you're on the journey and what you need to do. So the three things, the first thing is understanding the relative importance of these 12 vectors for you as a company crossing that.
Yeah.
So it's building that view. That's one thing that matters. So you need a structured approach based on analysis, which gives you that description. And by the way, a little aside, Mariano Mazzucato, in her famous book about reinventing capitalism in 2016 with Jacobs, actually said, what we need is a much clearer idea of how science and technology innovations actually commercialized.
Yes.
And so I sent her a copy of my first book. She never replied. I'm still waiting, should we say?
Well, maybe she's listening, you know.
Yeah. Or maybe I should send her another copy of the book with a note.
I will tag her in this, Uday, because
So-
I've been reading her books about consultancy, for example. The Big Con, she calls it.
No, I know, but she's done some very interesting things. But
Yeah.
first is understanding the relative importance of different things.
Yes.
So the right kind of intervention. That's the first thing. The second is drawing on all the experience that's available, because none of us can do everything on our own. And so you need quite a lot of expertise. And so what you were talking about networks and stuff earlier is we have this wonderful group of experts around. We need to tap them somehow so that companies like yours and others can tap into this with a single click on an email to say, we got this, who can help?
Yeah.
Right? And we're not joining up our experts and our networks of expertise in the way that we should do. The third point is probably the critical one, which is how do you manage the risk, the financial risk?
Yeah.
Because Rachel Reeves and the Treasury have said basically they talk about crowding in investment, so the state will go in alongside private money. But the fundamental challenge they face, they talk about patient capital. That's if you search for patient capital, you'll find lots of references to Mansion House speeches, etc.
Right.
What they're saying is we are risk averse. That's the story. Our pension funds are not investing stuff, right? So we've given them freedom to invest. But if you're a pension fund manager, will you invest if you're not satisfied about the risk profile? So the third thing that we have to do is to provide a way of mitigating the risk, so that you need some kind of way of saying to investors, we're doing things differently. That we have increased the likelihood of success from 10% to say 30%. So we're giving you the risk mitigation. So we're persuading you why it's okay for you to invest these precious pounds and dollars of your investors in this venture, rather than saying the state takes the risk. I mean, you look at what's going on in Scunthorpe at the moment. There's this question about, does a state only intervene as the investor of last resort, or does the state intervene earlier?
Yeah.
Right? And I think, so there's this question of risk mitigation.
Yeah.
Because if you can mitigate the risk, if you can show people that, for example, Karina's business, we've just going to help, we've increased the likelihood of her crossing this chasm and succeeding by factor of 2, then all of a sudden the investors start to look at you differently.
Yeah.
And so risk mitigation is the key to this thing, I think. So those are the 3 things I would say.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And in terms of, I guess, so the government might hear this and say, well, we do grants, we've got Innovate UK, we've got SBRI, we've got NIHR, all sorts of little bits of funding out there. And we've offered the EIS, SSIS schemes to reduce the risk for investors in the very early stages for angel investors, etc. What would you say to that?
So the first thing to say, I think, is that all the things you referred to, SBRI, Innovate UK Money and everything else, has been doing a very good job, but it's all focused around Chasm 1. So we're supporting, we're very good at supporting early innovation. So the universities should be very happy, although they always want more money. They should be very happy because we're doing a lot of support at the earlier stages, SBRI, etc. And they all invest on the basis of TRL, technology readiness level.
Yes.
And so by the time they've got to, say, TRL 9, which is about the max, that's a CRL of about 4 or 5. So it's basically just the first prototypes being built. So that support is great, but it's stopping too early.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first point to make about that. The second point to make is all the bigger ticket items of funding, state funding, the big amounts, 500 million, 300 million, etc., are all based on OECD definition of scale-up. Right. And the OECD definition of scale-up basically says you have to demonstrate 4 quarters of continuous growth in your headcount going up by 25% per annum, your revenue going up by 25% per annum, all the kind of standard metrics.
Right.
So that's much later on, because if you think about your business, other businesses who've built and demonstrated an early stage product, they haven't figured out their business model yet. No. They haven't got their early charter customers. So we have a gaping hole around in the middle around Chasm 2. So there's good stuff going on, and in a way the Treasury have sort of recognized the problem, which is why they're talking about the need for patient capital. But they're also equating patient capital with descriptions around what they call Series A and Series B investment.
Mm.
And depending on which geography you're in, Series A and B can mean very different quantums of money.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
In the UK, Series A, maybe 10 million,
Mm.
Series B, 25 to 30 million currently in life sciences.
Mm.
Right? In the US, you can multiply that number by about 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Right? So we have a challenge around this because it's not just about money. We need to do something else in terms of increasing the likelihood of success
Yeah.
around Chasm 2.
Yeah.
And we have the potential to do that in a structured way.
Mm.
But at the moment, so we're looking at if you look at what the government are trying to do, and if you look at the Department of Science and Technology, and Innovation, DCIT. Again, all that stuff. So we actually, when on the RDS, we actually published a paper. We published a critique of the government's green paper on industrial strategy late last year, in which we said Innovate UK should be removed from the umbrella of UKRI because that's focused on research.
Right.
UKRI has all these EPSRC, all the other people that were, and we said take it out, make it an independent statutory agency, and call it the commercialization agency, and give it the brief to tackle Chasm 2.
Yeah.
And the suggestion, and one or two people pointed out that originally the catapults were supposed to do this because the catapults were modeled after the German Fraunhofer model.
Right.
Of Mittelstands and growing scale companies because of regional economy.
Right.
But the catapults were neutered pretty much at birth because Hermann Hauser, who proposed them, had a very different model in mind. And then we had a third funding model, which was basically UK government money, a third. It was going to be European money, a third, which of course disappeared post-Brexit.
Yeah.
And the remaining third was going to be large corporates who were going to fund it because you were going to help them innovate faster, because all the large corporates at one time used to spend 3 or 4% of their revenue on R&D, and now it's less than 1%. So that's what was. But what happened after this was the catapults. The corporate money never appeared. European money disappeared, and all we had was regional money from Innovate UK and other people.
Yeah.
And it resulted in the catapults needing to raise money because they'd hired people and built stuff. They started providing services to all the startups, and now I hear stories about saying, why is my catapult competing against me in certain parts of the space? And also how is that shared?
Yeah.
So if you're a company that's developing, say, new gene therapy,
Yeah.
and say you're working with a cell and gene therapy catapult, and they develop a new process for you, can they commercialize it? No, at the moment they're not allowed to. Because can they enable somebody else to commercialize it? Yes, for a fee. But who's going to pay the bill?
Yeah, and that remains the challenge.
It remains the challenge.
And I guess it's really interesting because I guess if you just look at, all of the sort of other aspersions about Tesla and Elon Musk aside, but that's how Tesla became such a big company because the government invested quite significantly in it, and that sort of really, I guess, catapulted it into its successful position in the United States. And perhaps that's the bit that we don't hear enough about. Which tech giants have come out of the UK.
I know, but if you look at the, this is why we talked about Mariana Mazzucato a few minutes ago. Mariana wrote a book called The Entrepreneurial State quite a few years ago now. And Joseph Stiglitz, who's the World Bank ex-chief economist of the World Bank, might have won a Nobel Prize in economics. Stiglitz quotes it quite a bit, the work, because what she had in there was data which showed that every single innovation that really drove Silicon Valley's growth, everything from touch screens to the mouse, was developed out of Xerox PARC, which was a government-funded research center on the U.S. West Coast.
Right.
And so all the innovation that drove the digital industry in the U.S., including some of the advances in risk architecture and everything else, were funded by the U.S. federal state.
Yeah.
And we saw a replay of that when Obama was in power around stuff to do with energy and battery technology. So we have this, I would call it a myth, which says that the public sector is great innovation. If you look at Tesla, and you look at the history of Tesla was built and when Musk actually arrived, right, and what the value add were, all the components were all in place.
Yeah.
And they were all funded with state money because there was a very high risk involved at that stage.
Yeah.
And if you think back to the UK
Mm.
in the 1980s, we had all these government research establishments which had a huge, huge role. And they worked closely with the corporates, hand in glove.
Mm.
We had the National Gas Turbine Establishment, the National Aeronautical Research Establishment, all these people in the 80s. We had, even in plant sciences, we had the Cambridge Centre for Plant Breeding.
Right.
All
Wow.
these things were sold off in the Thatcher Revolution,
Right.
post-1987, 88, 89.
Mm.
And of course, guess who bought all those things?
America.
Some of them, but some
Yeah.
of them were interestingly state bodies out of continental Europe.
Mm.
So all of the plant breeding,
So other states.
yeah,
bought
other
it.
states bought it. So
Mm.
plant breeding, the entire plant breeding capacity of the UK and its ability to generate new genes and new material, new strains of wheat, etc., is owned by a German company called KWS, which is a private family-run business, and they bought all the areas around
Wow.
Cambridge doing all the plant breeding. And same thing happened in other places. So the Americans bought quite a lot of stuff,
Mm.
but the railways, for example, all the high performance railway carriage technology, etc.,
Mm.
is owned by German and French companies.
Yeah.
As you know, I mean, there was a story. The French own
Yeah.
quite a lot of our railway
Yeah, they
infrastructure.
do. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Mm.
So we, paradoxically, we're the only people who talked about the market, driving everything,
Yeah.
and then followed that all the way through for a period of 30 years, including the later years of Cameron and
Yeah.
Osborne.
Yeah.
The US never followed that.
Yeah.
The Chinese certainly never followed it.
Yeah.
With lots of state subsidy. The Indians didn't follow it.
Yeah.
So
And where that's left us is perhaps not
we're
enough
no.
powering our own economy.
No, I think that's the root of what happened, is that we actually believed in all the market mantra, etc. So we couldn't see, the risks of our national security elements technology ending up, say, in the control of another sovereign state.
Yeah.
Because everything was driven by market forces. We have the same debate going on now, as you know, around the stuff with steel, and then does this presage a wider conversation with China about state control? What about France? And if you look in the defense sector, with the Research Development Society doing a lot of work, there are very interesting questions about our so-called independent nuclear deterrent. Is it really independent or not? And I've even heard of one Australian blogger talking about how we could do a deal with the French, but the French missiles are too fat to fit inside our nuclear silos. which kind of is amusing, but but on the other hand, it's quite serious.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, absolutely. So Uday, we've talked a lot about companies falling through in this sort of chasm too, and perhaps sort of big initiatives that could be encouraged to help that have happened and perhaps in the future could happen. Do you know of anything else that's coming up? And I guess, what can you do with all your years of experience to support that?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, because I think I've talked already about the challenge around Chasm 2, which is a very big challenge, and it applies to all market spaces, but particularly in healthcare, it's very acute. And so last year, there's a group of us thought, rather than talk about what the problems are, why don't we try and design and test a solution for crossing Chasm 2? And so that resulted in the creation of a new vehicle called Bioforge UK.
Right.
And the idea behind Bioforge UK is that we want to select a group of companies that have crossed Chasm 1, and we have probably about 100, 150 in the UK at any point in time who are doing quite well. But most of them will have trouble scaling. A few of them might make it through the eye of the needle, as it were, through luck rather than judgment. But we decided we wanted to design an intervention to show what could be done in that space.
Right.
And Bioforge UK is essentially a vehicle which has three key elements. One is it has significant funding based on crowding in investment. So where Rachel Reeves has talked about crowding in investment, saying the state will put in a certain amount of money backed up by private capital, we're actually acting on that.
Right.
And the idea is that we're now talking to investors and the UK government and the investment vehicles to get a slug of money in. And we talk about significant sum of money to do this properly.
Right.
And so that's one element of what Bioforge UK will do. Essentially, it'll be an evergreen fund with a lot of expertise attached. And the point of the expertise is to reduce the risk, to change the risk profile for the investors who are coming in as part of the green fund, evergreen fund structure.
Right.
So that's one. And we're sort of talking about a serious chunk of money.
Yeah.
And the second element of this is how we reduce the risk. And it's really taking a very structured approach to intervention based on all the work that we've been doing using the Triple Chasm model to say we understand exactly what the interventions need to be. And so the intervention is designed to address each of the vectors in a structured way over a period of time.
Yeah.
And the third element is bringing the deep expertise that's available across the UK. We talked about earlier integrating it in because there's a lot of expertise which is isolated. We want to bring it all together in one place to try and have a bigger impact.
Right.
And so those are the three things that are going to be part of Bioforge UK.
That's amazing.
And we want to do about 10 companies a year.
Right. Wow.
And so we're talking.
So is it like an accelerator program with funding?
No, it's actually an intervention program where the companies remain where they are,
right,
and they get given funding that'll last for a whole year, and they get the support of the team for a whole year. And so the idea is they spend about a year inside Bioforge UK, and at the end of it, they become even more investable propositions.
Yeah.
And the people who are investing in Bioforge UK can then carry on investing because we've changed the risk profile.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's what we're working on.
What a great announcement to have.
Yeah, so we're kind of and we've got a team that's going to drive this and lead this. But the interesting thing is getting the balance right between providing financial support and providing deep expertise. So we're talking about senior people out of the UK biopharma industry being dragged in.
Yeah.
The focus for the first cohort will be around what other people would call tech bio. But it's around digital and AI applications. And we want to span the whole thing across all aspects of delivery. So we want to have stuff that comes out of there which is directly relevant to the NHS as well as being relevant to international markets.
That's amazing.
So we've got, the idea is
putting money where your mouth is.
Yeah, that's right. Rather than just talk to other people about saying we should do this, we should do that, we're actually going to try and do it ourselves.
That's amazing. When do you expect Bioforge to launch?
So Bioforge, a formal launch will probably be in Q3. We've been working on it for about a year now.
Yeah. And
we've been having conversations with all the usual stakeholders, including in government, because turns out that the financial model for how crowding in works is not entirely clear to most people in the investment community at the moment.
Right.
So we're actually innovating in how this works because if you're an investor, you put money in, but expertise is coming in and the companies, you've got to get the balance right. So everybody's incentivized, including the founding team.
Yes.
What we don't want is a situation where the founding team suddenly find themselves with such a small percentage of their business because a lot of money has come in from other places. And we're expecting international investment to drive this.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, I'm sure many people listening will be very keen to hear next. Where can they follow you or follow Triple Chasm? Where can they learn more?
So we will actually be so Bioforge is one of the people who are sponsoring the series of workshops that the RDS is going to be running on life science commercialization in May, June. And so I think probably the right time we will go live with the detail. It'll come out. We'll talk about it openly, publicly, with the opportunity to, because the key thing we want to do is we've already identified all the expertise, the tools that we need. We want to find the right companies, and so we're not going to have an application process to say who wants to come.
Right.
We are going to go and seek out these companies.
Right.
Right.
That's different.
Yeah. So what we're saying is if you think you've got something exciting, then find a way to innovative way to make your way to our front door.
Come with a little billboard or something.
Yeah, something which basically says, look, we're doing something exciting here.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of potential partners for doing that kind of stuff already in place.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, we look forward to the proper announcement, and we'll obviously share it across our socials as well.
Thank you.
So Uday, I'd like us to now zoom in for a bit. So we've talked sort of big picture stuff and how sort of almost investing in our homegrown innovations and innovators can really help that growth that the government keeps wanting for the economy. So hopefully that is the direction we'll go in some way, shape or form. And you're sort of bringing in Bioforge in that space as well, which is great. But if we zoomed in this very moment into the NHS frontline, and I'm running a hospital, I'm a director, and I've got huge financial pressures and of course, there's the whole changes in the reorganization happening, which is distracting. I'm not quite sure where my sort of next orders are going to come from. But equally, I've got lots of priorities that I must deliver on: financial savings, cutting my corporate headcount, and so on and so forth. What would you say to me when I feel like I have no headspace to take on anything new? So if an innovator or a new founder of a health tech company tries to sell me something, I'm just like, you know what, that's great. Come and talk to me in about a year when I've got a bit of headspace to do this. And I've been in challenging times in the NHS frontline myself, so I know how that feels and how hard it is. What perspective would you offer to me in that scenario?
So that's an interesting question. It's something we ponder quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because it's, a number of responses which you've already articulated. One is I can't do anything for 12 months or 18 months, come back when we figured it out.
Yeah.
Or the other is I'm completely frozen. I don't know what I'm doing day to day. And I think the correct response, in my view, to this kind of challenge is to actually do something, but to do something imaginative. And if you said to me, what would I advise people? I think drawing in our experience of the last 5 years, I would say one thing that we could have real power is to think about how you mitigate the risk of you doing something, right? And by that I mean is that if you're running a trust or if you're running a unit in a trust, or the important thing is you've probably identified a key challenge or two that you're trying to tackle. And it'll be no surprise that your contemporaries in other places around the country will be probably facing the same challenge. Yeah. So I would say the simple kind of succinct advice would be create a consortium to mitigate the risk. Get together with other people who share the same problem as you do, right? And if there's, say, 4 or 5 of you who are doing it, then you can share the financial risks, share the operational risk, and also you can mitigate some of the challenges around potential outcomes because you basically look at So I would say create a consortium to tackle a specific problem where you're sharing the financial risk is a really powerful thing. Yeah. The other thing I would say to get a bit of pace on there is that if you just do this as a NHS-based thing, then I think there's a risk that you get snarled up in bureaucratic concerns. So you need some external input, which is, call it market pull, customer pressure. And one of the things I would suggest is pick an area where you know that there is deeply held beliefs, but there's also a well-recognized challenge around. And one possible way of doing that is to look where there are charitable foundations that are being created. So if you pick something out, like, I don't know, there's people working on cystic fibrosis and cystic fibrosis therapies. If you find a trust or a foundation, a charitable foundation, and you make common cause with them, so you basically have somebody who's bringing the patient voice, not just the generalized patient voice, but quite a well-articulated patient voice. Because if you talk to these charities, they've spent a lot of time trying to understand. And they understand the challenges, they understand the group. Yeah. So I would say pick an area, find an appropriate charity or group of charitable foundations, put a consortium together involving those foundations and the different trusts, and add up all the money, you'll have a decent sized budget to do something, and then define a program of intervention which is aiming to deliver results within 12 to 18 months, right? Has to be a real working solutions that can be deployed at the clinical front end. That would be my suggestion, because it means that instead of sitting there and worrying, you're actually doing something very tangible.
And you almost are taking control.
That's the key thing. It's taking control rather than waiting for somebody to do something. We tried this in a number of places, and there's a company called Little Journey, who now moved to Leeds, whom we first met in Cambridge through Health Innovation East. And they were trying to change the overall approach to how young children about to undergo major surgery would deal with the mental health challenges. And they used this formula. And they've been very successful. And maybe at some stage I'll introduce you to the founders, because they now have 70 people in Leeds.
That's amazing.
And they went from being two people with an idea to this quite quickly because of this approach to commercialization.
That's really interesting, and hopefully considered good advice by our peers in the NHS as well. So coming to now the widespread innovators out there and the founders, if you had to give some advice to people who are just at the beginning of that journey, they're just about to kick off, what would your top 3 bits of advice be when they're just starting off?
Okay, when they're just starting off.
On their journey.
On the journey, I would say probably there are 3 things that they. One is if you're gonna go on a journey, you need to be very clear about your innovation or your technology or your process, what you're going to do differently. So you need to be very clear how you're going to change the value proposition. So that's one thing. Is what is it you're bringing to the party, potentially bringing to the party. The second thing is understanding who you're targeting it at. Because too many people will turn up with a technology solution. I see this in Cambridge quite a lot, where they have a great technology, and you say, well, who's going to benefit from it? They tell you about the technology again, and once they've done 3 or 4 times, you're saying, who is it going to make a difference for? And so the first piece of advice: be clear about what you're bringing. The second is be very clear about who you're going to make the difference for, right? And the third is finding how to match those 2 things together. Electrical engineers have a term for it. It's called impedance matching, where you match the 2 things, like the need versus the solution. And it's being able to understand that impedance matching. And we know from all the research we've done that people who have a great idea, and terrific ideas sometimes, will not succeed because they don't understand what problem they're trying to solve. The kind of common phraseology you get from these people, commentary from these people, is they'll say things like, "Oh, we're working on this great technology, and then we're going to hire a marketing team to figure out how we're going to apply it." Now, when they say that, they're not going to get very far. You need to know what problem you're solving.
Who for?
And who for? No,
that's really good advice. I think, that is often a challenge, and I feel the same, and I know the health sector quite well, arguably. And when we sort of were developing a product, just sort of defining that value proposition, I feel like over the last 2 years we're refining it every day. So it still feels like you think you know it, but then when you have to kind of maybe deliver it in a succinct 60-second elevator pitch, that's when it comes down to what is that core? What is the core of it? Because you might be benefiting the patients and the staff and this and that and this and that, but how do you sort of get to the core of it? And that's not easy to do, is it?
No, it's not. And the whole idea of the elevator pitch was invented when people look at the US, because they had many more floors in a tall building. And the elevator, if you went 18 floors, it got longer. Try doing an elevator pitch in Indonesia, where it's 3 floors. You run out of room by the time you got the 3rd floor.
Yes, good point. So based on all your experience of working with so many different companies at different stages, and obviously mentoring lots of founders as well as sort of senior execs across the globe, really. If I asked you to summarize, what are the key skills or mindset that you have seen in the most successful entrepreneurs or founders, what would you say those are?
I would say that there are several come to mind. One is clarity of vision. All the people who are really clear about the vision for what they're trying to do are the ones who tend to succeed.
Yeah.
The second is those who are capable of running a reality check regularly. In other words, how far away from their vision, and how they're going to pay next month's bill. Are they going to lose their house, or will they be sleeping in their car or in their garage? So I think that degree ability to kind of calibrate that risk at a personal level, because no matter how good your idea is, if you're broke, there's nothing you can do about it. And there's a third thing related to all that, which is the balance between the first and the second, which is bloody mindedness. It goes a long way, as you know.
I've been doing this for a decade now as well. So through all of those challenges and the reality checks, the bloody mindedness is what perhaps gets you through sometimes. So you've also authored a few books, and in particular, Camels, Tigers, and Unicorns. Now, anybody in the sort of business world probably has heard of unicorns, not so much the camels and tigers part. Is there anything? What's the difference, firstly, and what can innovators learn from that book, which I understand sort of brings a slightly different perspective on how to commercialize science and technology?
Okay. So when the book was first written, the first title of the book was Understanding the Commercialization of Science and Technology-Enabled Innovation, which you'll agree is a very sexy title. But the publisher didn't like it, and they said, we need something more succinct and to the point.
I see why they've changed it.
And so they said, change the title, Uday. And this was in 2016, late in the research, when we put all these papers together and stuff like that. And luckily, somebody came to my rescue. It was a woman called Eileen, forget her second name, who in 2013 had coined the term unicorn. And the unicorn, so it's only unicorns were defined by this venture capitalist in 2013. And the definition basically said any company that is worth $1 billion in valuation. Says nothing about revenues, doesn't say whether it's going on the way up or coming down, whether it's still alive. It was $1 billion valuation, right? And they call them unicorns. And because we'd done all this research on markets, etc., we had a very dim view of the notion of a unicorn, because we knew that most of these were companies that were going to fail at some point. And the unicorns in our book had much more in common with the South China Sea bubble. You know, the approach to valuation, which was just financial engineering, right? And then we were helped by. I was reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Colombian writer, who was really the inventor of a genre called magical realism. And so unicorns for us became part of the magical realism lexicon, and they fitted in with the idea of the invisible hand, which all macroeconomists talk about. Not too publicly these days, because people say, what the hell are you on about? But even Maynard Keynes talked about it, how things at a very high level would translate into things into the real market by the invisible hand of capitalism, capital and everything else. And so we thought, so we don't believe in unicorns because they're mythical creatures. What do we believe in? And when we looked at all the data, we realized that one of the common themes that was coming through was a lot of companies, bulk of them, were like camels crossing a desert. So going from oasis to oasis, fueling, refueling, saying, well, if I just make it to the next oasis, I'll be all right. Right? And so camels became a wonderful metaphor for most of these companies, saying it's okay to be a camel because camels survive. They don't die in the desert. And then we thought, but there are companies that basically change the dynamics by having a lot of money or some other kind of advantage.
Mm.
But they only survive in very specific circumstances, which is what a tiger is.
Yes.
If you take a tiger from its natural habitat, put it somewhere else, it fails. But if it's in the right place, it grows.
Yeah.
And so we thought camels, tigers, and unicorns was a much better way of explaining what we wanted.
Yes.
We didn't know we'd started a trend in animal metaphors because people now talk about gazelles and zebras.
Do they?
Yeah. And I've even had, I was interviewed on Romanian TV many years ago,
Right.
where this woman, she said to me, so tell me, is there any significance, your vector plots that you do? Should they look like the shape of a camel? Or quite weird.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe you and Sam need to work that through.
Yeah, no, we had a conversation about it, but I mean, yeah. So that's what.
Well, that's what they mean.
Yeah. But if you talk about books and stuff, and then people said, "Can you give us a how-to version of this?"
Yes.
So we wrote the scale-up manual,
Right.
which is like the how-to, which has all the tools and everything else.
Okay, brilliant.
And there's a third book on its way, by the way.
Right.
Because we were asked by the Scandinavian governments if we could model the effect of green technologies, green implications, and we had all this data, but not enough data. And they said we can give you all our data on growing forests, regrowing forests and stuff like that. And so we basically have this overlay called the sustainability overlay, which looks at the EU Green Deal.
Right.
And the third book is going to be called The Antidote to Greenwashing.
Very nice. Yeah. I like the three book names. You've learnt your lesson from your. I can't even repeat the first title of that first book. So there's camels, tigers, and unicorns. There's a scale-up manual, which sounds like the most relevant one for new innovators, perhaps.
It's for anybody who wants a practical guide. They can dip into page 77 or page 32 or whatever is appropriate to where they think they are.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so that's something I'm definitely going to grab hold of. And then there's a new one on the way, which is all about
the green agenda.
The green agenda.
Because the market spaces have now got circular value chains. There's got feedback loops. And if we want to get away from all the arm waving about the green agenda, then we need a structured approach, which we've actually built. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to upsetting all the investment bankers who've got their specialist funds for sustainable investing. Yeah. which basically just like every other fund. But right. Yeah.
So that's the antidote to greenwashing. Very nice. I look forward to that. So here's my last question then. Just looking at all this new technology that's on its way or is already there in terms of AI and obviously all the potential that it brings to the healthcare space. What across all the sort of companies you're working with or about the things that are going on in the healthcare space more sort of broadly, what is the thing that excites you most?
Wow, right. That's a tough question. I think it's stuff that interprets the meaning of data, because we have the capacity to try and image, diagnose, collect data from a variety of patients, and we also have the ability to understand the stuff that operates at a personal level versus the average data level, and so I think it's the ability to deliver personalized healthcare is really the exciting thing. All this stuff, what's the point of it? It allows you to tune a treatment for a patient in a very, very specific way, the personalized stuff. But, it's kind of it's not easy to do, as you know, because the economics currently mitigate against that. But we've seen some quite interesting things going back. Sometimes you're surprised and shocked by what's going on. And for me, the thing when I started talking about personalized medicine, which really shook me in a way that I hadn't expected to be surprised by this, was several years ago, 2 years ago, we were working with the UK government trying to do cross-border commercialization. And we came across a company started in India that was based on looking at Ayurvedic medicine. Ayurveda was an ancient branch of healthcare science in Buddhist and Hindu times and other times. And what they were trying to do was they were saying they wanted to try and understand the nature of Ayurvedic medicine using all the data that new genotype, phenotype data provides them with. Right. And so they were saying there was some science behind all this stuff. And the thing that staggered me was the insights were matching up. So there were people 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago who had figured some of this stuff out based on empirical data and evidence without understanding the structure of RNA, DNA, and everything else. But yet they were, and end on a really funny anecdote. I said to this guy who's running the company, who actually started off life as an aerospace scientist and PhD,
much like you,
just like So and I said to him, so what practical things are you doing here? And he said, we're measuring. I've got a device that measures blood pressure in a unique way. And I said, what do you mean unique way? And he said, you know how blood pressure devices in the West measure diastolic and systolic pressure, the high and low?
Yeah.
We're actually looking at the frequency spectrum of the blood pressure.
Right.
So I said, what, an FFT of blood? And he looked at me and he said, oh, so you know about fast Fourier transforms.
Right.
And I said, this is great, but how are you doing it? And he said, we've designed a bracelet that people put on the hand, and it basically measures the pressure all around the wrist.
Right.
And I said, what gave you the idea? And he said, I went to an Ayurvedic practitioner, because there are 100,000 of them in India.
Yeah.
And he said, when they go around, they can measure, when they're measuring a blood pressure, they're doing this. They're going around your wrist, rotating their hands. And I said to the guy, what are you doing? And he said, I'm trying to get an overall sense of your blood pressure.
Amazing.
Which was measuring frequency components. And so imagine how that could change the whole nature of preventative healthcare and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But personalized medicine, because apparently they have all this language about everybody has, and they talked about people having different constitutions.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I've read a bit about it as well. Yeah.
And you're thinking, wow, so there's actually a scientific basis behind that.
Yeah.
And now whenever he sends me articles about, his latest publication in some of the AI journals, I'm kind of reading. And then his latest one was he's teamed up with the Yoga Foundation in California.
Right.
To do that with brainwaves as well.
Wow.
So
personalized
healthcare.
Yeah. That's where it's at.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Uday, for all your time today. You've been very generous with all your insights, very candid as well. So,
thank you very much, Karina.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it too. Yeah.
And that's it for today's episode of Inside Health Innovation Podcast. A big thank you to Uday for such a thoughtful, insightful, and just mind-blowing conversation that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I really hope you enjoyed it too. If you want to hear more similar conversations, please don't forget to subscribe, like, rate, etc., or comment and share some feedback with us. You can find out more about Uday's work at triplechasm.com. They are also going to be supporting the Health Innovation Network West of England's Commercialisation Academy, which I believe is open for applications at the moment. So please do look them up as well. Thanks for your time today. See you next time.